independently during my studies, so either during my bachelor project or my master project. And I also want to focus on it kind of being an interesting kind of experience to step into the market as a freelancer while coming from these extremely research-based and extremely free and not tied to the market kind of projects, but how that led me to get jobs in a very specific area. And I thought that might be interesting. So I'm really interested in shape generation. I think during my studies, it was the first topic that really, there was a spark for me. I was really interested in also the conceptual and theoretical part of how shapes can be generated and what can I do, what rules and what kind of techniques I can tap into to generate shapes. Very broad term, but I'll show you what I mean in a second. So at Bauhaus University, we can choose courses based on topic. So for 8 semesters of my bachelor's, I chose typography 8 times. But the professorship at Bauhaus University was not given to a specific person. There was kind of like this empty period where they didn't really decide on anybody that they want to hire for this permanent position. So over the course of 4 years, I studied under various guest professors, which resonated in a very experimental outlook on type design. So there was very little basic education around type design and typography, but most of the guest professors wanted to do one crazy project for their time at Bauhaus University, which is why I landed into this very kind of experimental space during my studies. So this is kind of a shape-based, non-readable typeface that I did in a course with Götz Kramlich, who's a poster designer from Heidelberg. And the topic was type trends and just something you should create something related to experimental type. And I wanted to tap into shape creation. So I decided to design this modular set of shapes that can basically fit together wherever they are flat. And then they create kind of seamless curves. The curves all have no points, which is kind of like a rule. I decided for the set, and the end goal was to push them together with 0 space and have them create shapes while you type them. So I used the interface as kind of like my limitation, how these shapes can originally be put together and create maybe also some interesting effects. So this was in 2018. And it's my longest project in this style, and I still come back to it and also still add to this kind of archive. So this was the very first design I did with the shape set. Pretty basic, was offset printed for the courses magazine. But for some reason, like I said, with the shape generation, there was really a spark for me where I saw myself working with these shapes over and over again. And it stopped being about the shapes at some point and just about exploration within a certain limitation. And this is a very, very important part of my work to this day. So here you can see a lot of experiments that I did. I tried to create letters with them. I tried to create different layout, borders, shapes, and just try to kind of run free with it a little bit. And also, a very important thing for me is translation of space. So these shapes live in a very digital space. The tips are basically spikes that get thinner and thinner until eternity, basically. So the spike is not really well, it's not printable very well. And also creating this in wood, presented some challenges to me. But this is where I started to think about limitations again. So when you translate a digital shape set like this into the real world, then suddenly there are different rules that apply to it. So suddenly it's not stackable in the same way anymore that it was stackable in the digital realm. they are off balance sometimes. You can't really create the same shapes with them as you would in the digital world. And I think translating your designs from one state into another always leads to inspiration and also to kind of, I don't know, like German would say erkenntnis, so you learn something new from it. Another analog experiment was the scarf. I mean, these shapes can tile a plane in any two-dimensional shape. So it was really fun to look for analog applications that have a very specific shape, like this scarf, and use those shapes basically to my advantage, and to have a toolbox that I can just grab into and design two-dimensional spaces. I don't know if you know this project. Some of you may know it. It's the new aesthetic experimental type design catalog by Nilhard Laupichler. I think they have 3 editions now. And I was asked to present Großer Mono, this is what it's called, by the way, I didn't even mention it, in this catalog, and to create a specimen from it. This was quite a big challenge for me because I think it's quite, to me, quite conceptual in a way. So you could create a lot of different specimens for it that show the typeface and what it can do, basically, since it's just a shape generator. And I landed on this effect and kind of put like a 3D spin on it. And I'm presenting this because just showing this typeface in this magazine for experimental type led to a job that I did for Blue Marble Paris, as it was a print design for fabric, and it was shown at the Fashion Week, and was quite strange to me and so funny that something like publishing this typeface in a book for experimental type design could lead to a job in a field that almost has nothing to do with that field. And also the thing that they were most drawn to was this 3D effect, and nobody really cared about this interesting, like, I don't know, backstory I had for it, that it's a modular shape generator. And so sometimes for me, it's purely coincidence how I work. So now this was the time where my interest in creative coding really took off right before my bachelor's degree, because I started to really get tired of using Großer Mono and Illustrator and try converting to paths every time I want to like turn a shape around or when you stretch it. So I thought to myself, I've been working with these shapes for a long time now. What would be the ideal tool that I can basically build around it to use them so I have the most fun, basically? And then I decided to code this application. First I did it in processing, and then after I translated it to P5.js and uploaded it onto the web, you can use it. It's aspectedastas.de. Maybe, I don't know, you guys can handle that afterwards. I can send you a link or something. But yeah, it's tailored to the analog shapes advantages, I would say. So I have a pretty clear vision most of the time how I want these shapes to fit together. I don't want straight lines to end up in nirvana. I want them to all connect really nicely and make have this nice shape that sits perfect into a rectangular shape, basically. But another thing was also how there were quite a few very surprising results for me. So again, if you change the tool, if you change the state, if you change the conditions in which you can use a system, then you're exploring different boundaries and you will have different kind of results. Yeah, I forgot to mention as well, gradients have always been a thing that fascinated me really, also conceptually, not only because they look really, really nice, I think, but to display gradient, or digitally perfect gradient, you actually need every pixel to follow a certain rule and to sit in the exact same place where it belongs for it to look flawless. And I think that is something really interesting if you try to translate gradient into those states. So how to make an analog gradient, you can try it with light maybe, or with an inkjet printer. But these limitations and these rules of the medium will be very apparent in something like gradients. So this is why I decided to include them in my tool. They are always ending in a dark color, so they can be seamlessly connected to these shapes. I'm still working with this shape catalog and building on it. I wouldn't say in relay, but maybe every second week or so, I look at them again. I create a different set. I tried readable variations, but the only rule really for me is that one set has to be stylistically congruent in sets. So it has to follow certain types of rules, and also it has to work in this kind of zero space mentality. So it's really not about the individual component, but it's about what rules can I create to make an in-between and putting them together work, and it's not so much about the look of the individual component. So now I'm cutting to my next typeface. This was for my master thesis. I did 2 typefaces in my thesis, basically. And I followed this kind of mono-modular shape. So here you can see it's a raster-based typeface. And the special thing about it, to me, is that it's also purely component-based. So you can see it's made out of this kind of circle and this star. And out of only 2 components within a set grid, I tried to create all these different letters, basically. And the special thing about Uno for me is that it's an asymmetrical grid. So these bumps that you see at the end of a letter, they're never touching. It's asymmetrical and therefore always puzzling together, like creating an endless shape, basically, similar to the concept of poster mono, which I showed you before. So this is, I think, an experiment that I also did 6 or 7 years ago. But for my master's, I decided to reinterpret it and make a smaller version where the grid is finer. So this is the old, I think the raster is 6, the grid, sorry, and for this one it's 11. And then I kind of try to explore the boundaries of this quite harshly limited grid, because I discovered quite early on, while changing the grid up a bit, of course, in the early stages, that, with this great freedom and an empty canvas of a new grid, there are also always quite harsh restrictions. So this would be the base. This would be more of an experimental take on a bold. Also, I called it blur because it's not really that much thicker, but kind of an in-between of thin and bold. This would be more of a bold style. And then I did some really crazy variants of in between, which I thought were kind of interesting. The special thing about Win, and where I really got back into this kind of creative coding mindset, because OpenType feature, it's a bit similar to coding, I think conceptually, although it's not completely the same. So what I really wanted to achieve for Win is that there would be endless ligatures. It's kind of like an Arabic font where all the letters can connect to each other. And it's also accessible over the OpenType feature, like Arabic. And what I did was create clusters of letters, and there are 11 different heights where the letters can actually connect. And then I coded it was quite a tedious process actually, that every letter can connect on the most aesthetic level, sometimes also on the only level that they are able to connect. So yeah, this is what that looks like. And also I had fun in making the grid sometimes a little smaller. So there's kind of this base, which is monomodular. So it's a perfect square, just like poster mono. But with Win, sometimes letters have alternates that also stay within this asymmetrical grid. So it's never the 2 bumps that are touching, but has a few different styles, basically. This is a specimen that I offset printed, but just a shitty digital JPEG of it, sorry. But yeah, just top of that, one can be quite visual and create images with these sorts of modular typography sets. Few different examples where, I notice now that I'm looking at these just while I'm talking, a thing that I really, really enjoy is making a typeface and then just using the typeface for a poster and nothing else. I think this is where kind of a philosophy kicks in for me, where a typeface is a tool and the tool should be used. For my presentation, I also translated it to a real-world object. So it's basically plexiglass, domino pieces, not really domino pieces, but that's what I want to describe them as. I wanted to mirror this kind of light and dark effect. So it was printed on transparent glass. And this is what that looks like. This opened a few interesting thoughts out for me, like layering them on top of each other, which I didn't think of before, and also creating different colors while layering them. And this was a project that came from this Tanya font. So I was really happy about this because I always communicated this effect as visual encryption. So I was able to do an animation for Forbes magazine where they used it for their crypto 50 blockchain 50 article. This is where that's from. I don't know why it's not moving. Now it's working. So I was approached by the creative direction of Forbes magazine. So they have in-house designers and found the typeface branding, I think, on Instagram. This is another type-based application of Gradial. I managed to find out that while using these columns, I can also create custom type animations where it's switching from one word to another by kind of hiding the other columns at the bottom. So it says Ambiguous Aesthetics, and it was displayed at the Skyscape in New York. Can you see that? It's lagging a little for me. Okay, perfect. And then look, this is how it actually looked in real life. And now the, I think, interesting part is after I played around with it so much, I kind of tried some different things within its limitations. So I thought, a main theme of this typeface is color. I can recolor it. And it's like all my typefaces built like building blocks. So maybe I can try some images with it. And this is where there was another layer of storytelling for me that was hidden inside of this project. So I tried all of these different moving ASCII animations and also tried more storytelling focused approaches with it. So car wash, really shiny, it's self-explanatory, then something that's really glowing from the inside, and also the sunrise was really an interesting exploration for me. Then also I went on to try more complex illustrations with it. And this is when a project really pays off for me, when I can start playing. So it's all building up for the first 60% of the project. And I'm happiest when I can play with these systems and explore the different limitations, basically. This is where I started to add more components into the typeface for a logo job. So these rounded glyphs were not part of the typeface, but then added to achieve this more simplified look of it. This is the first draft on the left and the final moving draft on the right. You hear it sound loud. Then plan down. This was a project that Studio Yukiko from Berlin was working on, and they asked me to be one of the illustrators working for one page. The average US citizen spends 44 years on their phone. It was a booklet per inch when they encouraged people to limit their screen time on dates, I guess. So this was one of my first jobs where Cranial actually became a tool of illustration for me more than a typeface. So this is completely custom and in the style of Cranial and using some base glyphs to construct it, but where it really moves away from presenting itself as a typeface. This was also a custom animation that's very illustration-based with Cranial for me. For Unlocked. And this is the newest exploration with Cranial. I can't say who it is already, but I was in every one of these jobs, I was very surprised what is possible within the system. So they asked me to do 4 illustrations, and one of them was titled Encapsulate the new era of good design. What does good design mean in the new era of AI? And I was like, how would I show this with building blocks and yeah. And I was really surprised how much detail, how much storytelling fits into a system like this. So I surprised myself with that one actually. So I created a website at the end of, so this was after my master thesis, all these projects and all this work, but at the end of my thesis, I created a website that basically hosts all my typeface explorations over the last years, also outside of the master's program. So it's monomodular.de if you want to visit it and have a look around. And if there is time, let me know. I wanted to quickly get in on my take on creative coding and aesthetics. Let me know how the timeline. All right. So like I mentioned before, quickly, this was really the main motivation for my master thesis. I wanted to give myself a reason to get into code deeper and be motivated with it and what I actually want from code. So to me, coding is much more than adding another tool as a designer in your toolbox. It's really, for me, a motor of inspiration because you can use all these themes, breaking things down that are very complicated into simple rules and working with these kind of like a loop, for example, or on and off, 1 and 0. It's principles that have been around since the beginning of computing, basically. And I can learn these very simple principles and build, enrich my own modular systems and designs with them. So it was really about research for me and to kind of define what kind of aesthetic I'm interested in within the realm of coding. And because I've always been very interested in the edges of some fields, like what's the border between graphic design and typography, what's the border between readability and basically hiding meaning. And one thing that I think is really, really, really exciting about coding is if we imagine a statue, making a statue in an analog space. You have your tools, you use them, and it's important whether the tools are big or fine. It's important how much force you put into it, but also if we're not talking in an art context, if we see a stone lying on the ground, there's so much complicated real-life data that shapes these kind of analog objects. Is it windy? Is it cold? Or how's the humidity? Have I kicked it and now a piece is missing from it? So technically, we could collect all this data and explain why the thing looks like it looks. But in reality, we really can't, because the amount of data is just too big. In the digital realm, this is different. When we write a script or we create something with digital tools that also have scripts behind them, for the first time, or to me, it feels like the first time that we actually know what exact data shapes an aesthetic. And it's reproducible. So this kind of analog side would not be reproducible because it's impossible to create all these circumstances again. But in the digital realm, this is. So now the data really plays an important part. So let's say this is a creatively coded visual. There are two aspects, or there are multiple aspects that we can look, like what does it consist of, what kind of concept can we find here, what does the aesthetic mean, blah, blah, blah. But there are really two aspects that pop out to me really intensely. And the one aspect is it being purely based on data and logic. So it's actually a form of data visualization. It's nothing more than the data and the numbers that go into it. But on the other hand, the second aspect is it being a means of visual communication. So humans, when they look at it, they see something in there that is not purely based on data and logic, but in this case, something like gradient can look like a sunset, and a sunset can also mean something. So the two aspects are structure and data visualization, and communication interpretation. So kind of this design information that I as a designer have an influence on as well. And this kind of balance, I call it ambiguous aesthetic, when these aspects are balanced. So it's recognizable as something rooted in logic and structure, but also it can mean something as a form of visual communication. This is what I chase when I use coding in my designs. So the input and the data, the numbers really play a big role for me because they can also be poetic motor for design. This is the third project that I did for my master thesis. It's an archive color generator, basically. So when you put in a lot of images and then you get this PDF of all the colors interpreted in a different way. I used a geological archive for it because this example of the stone that I just used in an analog way really inspired me, that like a stone is very pure representation of the analog data that shaped it, basically. And I also communicated this as an independent project. And this is the styles that it can produce. So one of the styles, some experiments that I did with it, and similar to the typefaces, I communicated this as the research project, and it being creatively coded, obviously. And this then led to design jobs for me, where people were then, like the typeface, obviously, I mean, it's design, it's very visual, are interested in the style that this tool can produce. So fun. The tenants. Okay. Okay, there are two layers to this. Sorry. So basically, for this, I was given a lot of images, and I transformed them with my tool, and then they were layouted for Wired magazine for an article they did a few months ago. Yeah, and usually the last project I wanted to show you is a music video, but I think it's layered on here, so I might need to do a quick adjustment if that's fine. So it's 10 minutes long, so I thought I might cut it off right here. And yeah, thank you so much. This was my talk.